chapter 3 was talking about what specific issue? What was the thing that James brought out and was trying to address specifically around verses 9 through, I believe, verse 12? What was the issue? The tongue, but specifically, what does he talk about in that section with reference to what we say? What was it? Double tongue, double talking. Talking out both sides of your mouth. Hypocrisy is what we've been trying to deal with. And that was perfect timing for the PowerPoint. But we're talking about this idea of hypocrisy and trying to do a deep dive into what this actually means and what we're actually trying to say when the topic of hypocrisy comes up. Because if there's a word in American English that is used consistently and constantly, it's that of hypocrisy. Whether it's talking about politics, business, whether it's talking about religion, it doesn't really matter. This word is used constantly. But a lot of people, when they use this terminology, it's not really used appropriately. And we were trying to discuss what this word actually means. And can someone tell me what the actual definition of hypocrisy was that we talked about last week? I know it's a little while ago. I'm so fuzzy about what happened 2 days ago sometimes. But to act. That's a really good analogy for and description of it, because the word that was translated or transliterated, for lack of a better word, into our modern day word hypocrisy was a Greek word that literally meant to play a role, to act. Now, it wasn't used in that context in older Greek, but through Latin and changing into English, they started using this terminology and saying that, oh yeah, you're acting, so you are a hypocrite, you are an actor. You're just playing a role. You're not who you say you are. You're just pretending. Now, for those of us who grew up, and I know I'm not that old, but I remember being younger, and my little brother and I would always play make-believe. And we were in the backyard, and you can imagine every dragon, every enemy, every nightmare scenario you really can. But we were pretending. We were playing a part. But a lot of people allow this acting to be a major part of their adult life. I am playing a role to make everyone think I am something that I'm not. And you've seen these types of people before. You see them in a crowd of this group, and they're acting one way. You see them in this other crowd. They're a totally different way. They're in another crowd, and they're even different than the other two. And the fascinating thing is they might be bad-mouthing every single group they were in. It's this hypocrisy. And God consistently talks about this idea of hypocrisy and talks about us being genuine in who we are. Now, this is something that's come about a lot in our modern day era of religion. People are really sick of the make-believe faiths. In fact, if you go look at a lot of statistics with modern day denominations, they tried this idea of, we're just trying to be very presentable. We want to give the public what they want. We want everything to be flashy and nice. And really what you'll start to notice is their numbers are going down. They're not going up. They're going down. Now, why is that? Because when you get down to it, when you take away the flashy lights, when you take away the charisma, when you take away the crowds, there's really no substance there. There's nothing that they're holding on to. A lot of them are just glorified TED Talks. Just encouragement, going, motivational speaking. What God constantly talked about was, from the beginning, he never presented himself to be something he was not. And as Christians, that is the last thing we ever should be, is presenting ourselves as someone that we are not. So God constantly dealt with this. He didn't pretend that he was going to tell us everything that was fine and dandy and everything that was comfortable. No, from the very beginning, he told us things that were uncomfortable about his people. Genesis chapter 1, everything's great. Genesis chapter 2, everything's great. Genesis chapter 3, the entire world falls apart. 3 chapters into the Bible and the world falls apart. And then you go to 4, you have the first murder. You go on to 6, and the entire world is so bad, God's ready to wipe them all out. I don't know about you, but if I was reading a novel and that's how that started, I'd say, man, this author had some problems. Why is he wanting everything to be so dark, so fast? But God's just describing the reality of the world. When God inspired the writing of the Bible, he was not presenting it as just a specific kind of book to draw attention. It was a book that was stating fact. If I read a history book and I read about one nation, and this nation is just wonderful and absolutely everything that it does, it is just the greatest nation in the world, I probably should go look at the back and see where it was published, because it was probably that country. If you're in England, England was the greatest nation of the world in their history books. If you were in France and they told their history of their wars, they were the great nation of the world. America, we do the same thing. Every other nation has done this. We were this nation, we were this great nation, or we did these great things or these wonderful things. But when it comes to the Bible, God tells you the good, the bad, and the ugly about even the heroes of the Bible. Think about David, a man after God's own heart. And what do we read about? What did he do? He made a lot of mistakes, caused a lot of problems, not even falling through. We say, I'm a great person because I've never committed murder. He even crossed that line. But he was still called a man after God's own heart. Why? Because David had genuine repentance. When David changed his life, it was genuine. It wasn't, oh yeah, things went, that was really bad of me, but you know what? If it came up again, I'd do it. Do we read of a situation like Bathsheba ever happening again to David? No. We read of the consequences of that action. We read of what happened to his family as a result of those things, but we see in Psalm 51 the attitude that David had. He watered his couch with tears, just hoping he could be back in favor with the Lord. When it comes to our Christianity, when it comes to our understanding of sin, when we reject God, when we sin, what is our mindset? Do we have the same attitude that David did, where it broke him to his core, knowing he had hurt God? A lot of preachers have come about and said, well, if you had hurt your spouse, how would you feel? Or if you had hurt your family member, how would you feel? What lengths would you go to repair that relationship? Unfortunately, a lot of people in our own society, they would treat their family no differently than they would God. It would be well, you can get over it. We have a me-centric society, a me-centric population, a me-centric culture. And friends, the Bible is fairly different from that. Yes, we are individuals in that we have individual responsibility. We have the individual responsibility to make sure I'm living a godly life. I have the individual responsibility to make sure the things that I'm saying are true, are honest, are good, are pure. We talked about that in James chapter 3, verse 1, where we're not to be many masters, knowing we shall receive the greater condemnation. We're to take a look at the things that we say. But Christianity is about a collective, too. It's not just individuality. Now, this is not the collective in the sense we like to see in the world, where people try to say, well, Jesus was a communist. Well, no, Jesus was not a communist. I think he came before communism. But neither was he just purely a capitalist. Neither was he American. Neither was he any Republican or Democrat or anything along those lines. You see, the interesting thing about the world is a lot of different philosophies have tenets that Jesus taught that does not make them godly. That does not make them imitators of Christ just because one or two things match up. So when we're trying to look at this idea of hypocrisy, and we're trying to delve into this definition and really looking at how does God feel about this specific practice and what are these specific ways we are to deal with this or to live our lives, it's important for us to take note of the fact that if we pledge our names to something, if we pledge our lives to something, that is a very serious commitment. A person who was a hypocrite once is rarely trusted again. A person who was dishonest very quickly becomes a liar. And when it comes to the idea of hypocrisy, even psychology has discussed this. Just look at how social media works. You look online and you see the shiniest rendition of everyone's life. Everything looks perfect. And you can take away the Instagram filters. You take away the edits that they put on the picture, you start to realize real quick, that's not the life that they're living. That was something good that they posted. One of the things that cracks me up is when people post pictures from like 12 years ago just to keep their life looking interesting. It's a form of hypocrisy. I'm not being honest about my life. I'm presenting. I'm playing a role. I'm showing the world this is how great everything is. It's like the old cartoons where the guy is living in a mansion, he shuts the door, and then the cardboard falls down. And you see a little shack behind it. It's presenting something. It's showing the world this is who I am, when the reality is it's far from it. One of the things I grew up hearing a lot was everyone was trying to express their individuality by copying exactly what everyone else before them did. But that's how a lot of us work. See, Christianity is about being individuals in Christ, working for a greater good. That's the way that it all works together. So we're talking about hypocrisy, and we're going to get into, I believe we're on slide 2 on this one. Christians strive to imitate God and Christ, so genuineness is necessary. If I'm trying to look like God, I should follow the characteristics that God showed. Correct? Is that not how I should be living? If Jesus did something, I should try to imitate that thing. If I claim to be a mechanic, but I had never touched a car before in my life, never touched any parts, never ordered any parts, don't even know what an engine looks like, am I a mechanic? No. How many of you are signing up to let me work on your car if that was how I described it? You said it's going to end up worse than when I got it. But a lot of us are trying to present to the world. A lot of people in the world are presenting to be Christians, and they don't even know the basics of Christianity. They don't even know who God is, much less be able to teach someone else about who He is. You see, we like to have this image of Christ, and we say, there was a statement I heard a while back of how people describe God, and one guy said, I like baby Jesus, or I like Jesus in the temple, or I like the Beatitude Jesus. Friends, we don't get to pick and choose His characteristics. We get all or nothing. We can't just make believe this version of God. This isn't buffet style Christianity. We either take Christ and we say, I'm going to be a follower of Him no matter what, or I reject Him and walk away. Those are our only two options. Now that sounds narrow-minded, right? Well, no. When you marry someone, when you date someone, are you getting just certain parts of them? If so, we'll find out very quickly how short that relationship is going to be. No, you get all of it. The good, the bad, the ugly, the bedhead, the bad morning breath, everything. We don't get to pick and choose what we get. Now, when it comes to Christ, everything that He offers us, nothing He's going to offer us is going to be bad. Some of it might be hard, though. Some of it might be painful. But God is offering us something that is far better than anything this world can offer, and we are trying to imitate Him to others. We are the object lesson, if it will. See, the Bible is written in black and white, but we're the pictures. We show people what that looks like. So what are we showing? How are we imitating Christ to the world? Are we showing Him someone who is a hypocrite? Are we showing the world someone that is dishonest? Are we showing the world someone who is manipulating? What do we show the world? You see, when we come together, we have an easier time being Christians, right? It's a comforting thing. Because we're all on the same page. We all have the same goal, right? We're all trying to be Christians. The second we walk out those doors, though, it's a different crowd. And that's when we get to see who we actually are. How many of you have heard the statement that your character is who you are when no one else is around? Probably most of us have heard that statement before. So who am I? Am I wearing a mask? Am I pretending to be someone that I'm not? See, Christ condemned those who were not genuine in their beliefs. Remember what Christ told to the Laodiceans in Revelation chapter 3. He said, I would that you were cold or hot, but because you are lukewarm, I will spew you out of my mouth. Now, that was an object lesson that the Laodiceans would truly understand. Because the city of Laodicea at that time, they received their water, and it came from a mountain spring, but by the time it got to them, it was lukewarm. And it was disgusting. No one drank that water. So what God is telling them is that you know that water that you hate so much? That it's disgusting and it makes you literally sick to your stomach. He said, that's what your actions are doing to me. I'm disgusted. I don't hate you. I'm disgusted by what you're doing. And because of this, I can't allow that to be a part of my life. I'm not going to keep something in my life that's consistently making me sick. If I'm in a house that is filled with black mold and I'm getting sick every second of every day, what am I going to do with the house? Tear it down, sell it, or get rid of the mold? Those are the options. So God is not going to allow those things to be a part of his church. Remember in Psalm 1 where he describes the latter part, verse I believe it's 6, where he says, the Lord knows the ways of the righteous, but the ways of the ungodly shall perish. Before that, in verse 5, he even described that sinners will not stand in the congregation of the righteous. They're not going to be able to coexist. See, Jesus has consistently dealt with this point. God has consistently dealt with this point with his people. He even talked about with the children of Israel. You come out of Egypt and you worship me and you're happy and everything is going great. The second you get into the wilderness and things get a little bit difficult, what do you do to me? You make a golden calf and you say, this is the God that brought us out of Egypt. This is the God that saved us. Hypocrisy. I'm only going to follow God when it's convenient for me. When it becomes difficult, I'm gone. I won't name his name. God wants those who are willing to actually follow him, who are going to be committed to him. None of us would enter into a business contract with a dishonest business partner. None of us would marry someone who we see them being a hypocrite on a consistent basis if we were in good knowledge, in the right headspace. Because we would know if they're willing to do this with others, they're willing to do it with me as well. So do we think that God is going to be willing to do that? That God is going to be willing to make sure that he is in a relationship with people who do not love him? See, the problem with hypocrisy is it's fake love. It's a fake persona. That's not the real you. And the problem is a lot of people who engage in hypocrisy, after a long period of time, they don't even really know who they are. I just make everybody else happy, or I present to everybody else to get me what I want. It's a very serious problem because it literally destroys a lot of our own critical thinking. Because it stops being about what's right, what's wrong, what's a benefit, what's actually good for me to do, and it becomes about what do I need to do in this particular situation. Who do I need to be with this particular crowd of people? And it divides you into people that you're not. One of my instructors at the Memphis School of Preaching said consistently, and it was a preaching class in particular, and he told the group, he says, if nothing else, believe what you preach or else it will tear you apart. He said, if you're preaching a message you don't truly believe, it will tear you apart. Both mentally, emotionally, and it will cause physical ramifications as well. Someone described and said, if you don't believe that that's true, look at politics and you see someone who went in and when they leave. So lying takes a lot out of you. Now that also comes from just the stress of the job as well, but if we are pretending to be something that we're not, friends, that's only hurting us. That's only breaking us down. If I am genuine in my faith and I'm committed to God, that's something I can lean on, I can be committed to, and that's just genuinely me. How many of you have been to a place where you have a situation, as I like to call it, canned smiles? You walk into a place and it just looks like the Joker walking around. And you know there's nothing behind that. They're just being polite. Now, how does that feel in comparison to when you walk in the door? And maybe it's not quite as big a smile, but you know that person is checking on you. You know that person genuinely cares what happened to you that week. There's a difference in the two. We're not trying to be hypocritical people. We're trying to be genuine. I've said before, and I'll say it again, I'm never going to pretend that when I'm in the pulpit I can't make mistakes. I'm never going to pretend that I won't cause problems on accident. And that's why we have this family, that we can call each other out. We can help each other on those things. But if I just hide that, if I hide when I have problems, I just suffer in silence. We're to be genuine people. One of the best examples of dealing with this hypocrisy is when Christ was dealing with the Pharisees. Let's look at Matthew chapter 6. It's Matthew chapter 6. And if someone could read, let's read verses 1 through 3, or 1 through 4, excuse me. Whoever is there first. Matthew chapter 6, verses 1 through 5. Right, verse 4 says that your charitable deed may be in secret, and your Father who sees in secret will himself reward you openly. What's Jesus telling these people? Remember, this is the Sermon on the Mount. This is part of that first major sermon that Christ taught. And he immediately, in the second chapter, starts off dealing with hypocrisy. He says, when you give your alms, when you're doing charitable deeds for others, is what the New King James says, don't be like the hypocrites are. It's not like I go out and say, "Hey, everybody, I'm putting this coin into this beggar's hand. Everyone notice. Everyone look at this. See what I'm doing?" You would look at that and say, "That's just pathetic. What is wrong with you?" No, he says you do this as a genuine fashion. If people see it, they see it. But you do it with an honest heart. Go ahead. Okay. Yep. Absolutely. Yeah, it really comes down to this is just who we are. See, as Christians, it's not like a checklist that we're just checking off every single box and making sure, oh, if I check off all these boxes, then I'm a Christian. No, that's not what we're doing. We have a genuine life that is imitating Christ. I can look at, let's look at it from this perspective. If I'm following a recipe, I can follow a recipe exactly the same way that someone wrote it down, and it might taste different, right? You may have gotten a recipe from your grandma or your great-grandma, or maybe your mom had one, and you follow the recipe to the letter, and it comes out, and you taste it, and you say, it ain't right. It don't taste the same. It's not quite exactly what it's supposed to be. Maybe it was because they added a little dash of this or a little extra part of that, or maybe a little pinch of that. Does anyone know what a pinch is? I keep wondering that when people say that. But it doesn't taste quite right because there's something else there. And friends, that little something else with a Christian is the proper mindset and attitude. I can follow every single step, but if my heart is not in it, I'm still robbing God. Isn't that the point of Malachi chapter 1, where God was talking to his priests and he says, "You've robbed me," and how were they doing it? And what they were, their mindset behind it, their practices. Go ahead, Frank.
To help people. We see people in need. We see people hurting, and it affects us. You know, for me, I think about it a lot, but I look at what's happening over there. What's happening over in Ukraine? What's happening in Israel? You know, what if that was here? What was that? What if that was affecting me? You know, how would I feel? I mean, I really think about those things and the struggle that those people are going through. And we should genuinely think about those things and care about those people, even in our country, wherever anybody's struggling. And we have the opportunity to help those places.
And even kind of tacking onto that a little bit and taking that a little bit further. Should it be the case that our concern and our compassion waits till something is dire and actual lives are being lost before we realize the seriousness? There's people dying overseas, and that's an absolute tragedy, and that's a horrible thing that's happening. But friends, we are losing souls daily in our own backyard. In this very town that we live in, we are losing souls. But for a lot of us, and it's not something that's new to us, it's not something we're just uniquely terrible in this department, because it was something that happened even back in the days of Israel as well. Remember what Jeremiah said to the people? He's describing all this calamity that's going to be coming upon them. Just change and things will be better for you. And they said, everything's fine. We're comfortable. We have food. We have shelter. We have wealth. Everything is going good. What are you talking about, Jeremiah? Why should we care? Why should I change my comfortable life to try to accommodate for this supposed boogeyman that's coming? Friends, if we are going to be Christians, if we are going to follow God to the letter, and I will be the first to tell you, I'm not perfect at this, but we have to acknowledge the seriousness of the world that we live in. We have to acknowledge there is a dire emergency happening right now. We're on the sinking ship and we're guiding people to lifeboats. That's our job. That's who we are. Because either we're in the lifeboat, meaning we passed away, and we're going home. We're guiding people to the lifeboat. We're trying to help them get there. That's what a Christian's job is. Or we're not heading for the lifeboat. Those are the three positions. Why not? Friends, this is serious. It's more than just, be genuine people, be happy people, and be godly people. There's a more serious tone to this because, friends, it's not just about you and I getting to heaven. It's about trying to help everybody else get there too. Now, I'm not directly responsible for their decision. I can give them the gospel and they can still reject it. Remember what happened with Jesus himself when he was teaching to the scribes and Pharisees. And they said they were talking about the miracles that Jesus was performing. What do they call it? The power of the devil. They saw who he was. They saw he matched all the prophecies. They saw he had the power of God. They saw all of these things take place. But he wasn't who they wanted, so they rejected him. It's more than just they didn't understand who he was. They rejected who he was. So when it comes to this hypocrisy, when we're talking about this topic, let's understand how serious it actually is. Because how would you feel? What would your thought process be if you had, let's say there was a person in charge of sounding the alarm if there was ever a nuclear war coming. That's their job, is there to warn everybody that it's coming. And he whispers to his buddy and says, hey, I know I said that my job is to try to help him, but if I know what's coming, I'm getting out of here. I'm going to run. I'm going to get out of here. How many of you want him manning that post? We say, fire him. Get someone else who's actually going to warn us. But as the Old Testament prophets describe, that's our job. We're to be the men standing in the gap. We're warning people of what's to come. And a hypocrite can't man that post because he won't be there when things go wrong. Christ is condemning this because it is serious. Christ said, I'm going to be genuine enough in what I'm teaching that I'm willing to stand at the very circumstance my life is going to be taken, and I'm going to keep saying the exact same thing. When Pilate questioned me, when the Pharisees attacked me, when the Sadducees attacked me, the Herodians, when the people were crying, let his blood be upon us and upon our children, he still said the same thing that he said before. Are we that group of people as well? Are we the people who are going to imitate Christ in the face of anything that comes up? See, when we look at it from that perspective, how important are petty squabbles? How important is differences of opinion? we understand the seriousness, if we understand we're to be genuine in what we believe, the other stuff kind of takes care of itself, is it not? I heard someone describe it this way. Arguments and hurt feelings are the blessings of a calm society. If we have time to argue, bicker, and fuss, we're comfortable. If we have time to hurt each other's relationships, to tear each other apart over petty differences, that's a society that doesn't know struggle. Because other nations that deal with those kind of things, other people when they're faced with these problems, that doesn't tend to happen as much. We have more things to worry about than just that. See, when James was talking to this group of people who were scattered abroad due to persecution, he wasn't just dealing when he's saying divisions among you and problems among you. He wasn't dealing with colors of carpet. He wasn't dealing with worship times or anything like that. What he was dealing with was you're dividing each other based on what you want from God. You're dividing each other based on your tongue. You're dividing others because of your anger. He's trying to deal with more serious topics here. And as Christians, we should understand we are to be a serious people. Yes, happy people because we understand what's coming next. That's Psalm 1. A blessed life is someone who can be committed to God and digs into his word. But we have to understand the seriousness. And that's really what this entire section is about. And I wish we could have gotten a little bit farther, but it's hard to get through this kind of stuff in a short amount of time. But I wanted to dwell on this point because Christ took the time. You see all those verses up on the screen. That's just the tip of the iceberg. I could go into the Old Testament and get a lot more than that. But that's just the New Testament of what Christ specifically said about hypocrisy. You think he takes it seriously? You think he's concerned about that? He didn't play a role. He doesn't want us to do the same. Are there any comments or questions in the last 30 seconds?
Ships in that time. There was a man on that ship who was shoot his third class. And the thing I want to say about him is the genuineness and keeping in the fight no matter when the going gets tough. If they were being attacked by the Japanese, they were coming in and shooting at them and screwing the ship there. Well, there was a ship out there, or a plane on the ship out there. He ran to that there and got under where the gun was and was shooting at that and shot the plane and saved the Enterprise. At that time, it flipped off the tail of his airplane and went in there. And he was there for the whole night. Eventually, he was caught by the Japanese when he was shot down later on, and they threw him overboard and he drowned. But he was in a fight till death for our country. The same thing spiritually. We've got to be in there when the going gets tough. We don't go off and run off.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, we're going to pick up there, and we will get to the second point of this, I promise. Oh, go ahead, Larry. And even kind of adding to that, for those who couldn't hear, Larry was describing that's one of the 7 things that God hates. Lying and hypocrisy is a major part of that list and how he describes those things. But as Christians, we're imitating Christ, which means that we're going to hate the things that he hates. We're going to love the things that he loves. Hypocrisy is something that seems to be kind of inherently hated among all people. But it's also one of the most practiced things. So that's why this is one of the things we're trying to hit. That's a very important section. But we're going to pick up there next week and try to hit that a little bit more in depth. But thank you all for your attention.